One, two, three, four. Alright, I'm going to stop you there. That was so good, you guys. Awesome sight reading. Now, look at the composer. What's his name? Okay, now put away your instruments. We're going to learn a little bit about him because where are you guys going next week?
The orchestra.
Yeah, you guys are going to the orchestra. You guys are going to see a concert.
Yay.
Anyone know what you guys are going to be learning about or take a guess?
We're gonna look at professionals.
Going to be learning about Beethoven. Awesome. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little teeny tiny look at Beethoven and his life. So when you go to the concert, you will be able to sort of hear his life and his music. It is possible to do that. So we're going to start with what we know. So, what do we know about Beethoven already? Does anyone know anything about Beethoven?
He's a famous composer.
Famous composer.
Well, didn't he write Beethoven Symphony?
He did.
Okay, that's it.
Alright, what else?
He was famous for playing the piano.
He did play the piano. Okay, anyone else know anything?
Was there a movie that called Beethoven?
There was a movie called Amadeus that was about Mozart. Close.
Didn't he go deaf?
He did go deaf. Alright, so that's a pretty good start. You guys know a good bit about Beethoven. Now, Beethoven's life was it was sort of sectioned off into 4 different periods. The first one being, of course, his childhood. Now, his childhood wasn't too bad. There have been worse childhoods. And he was very famous from the beginning, more or less. So he was born in Germany. He was a German composer in 1770, and he first performed when he was 7. So he was younger than you guys. He was like a 2nd grader when he first performed. And he started teaching. His father was his teacher, but soon he started taking lessons from a local organ player. And you guys are 11?
10.
10, 11? He was 12 when he wrote his first piano pieces and they got published. So that was a pretty big deal. He got his first job when he was 14, so he was a freshman in high school when he got his first job as a musician. And back in Beethoven's time, the place to be for musicians was Vienna, Austria, which is this little country near Vienna, south of Germany. Now what we're going to do with this timeline is we're going to pick 2 things from Beethoven's childhood that you think would most affect his music. So, out of these 3, his birthday, his first performance, or his first teacher, who thinks his birthday is the most important? Raise the hands. Alright, so we have 4 for his birthday. His first concert, what do you think who thinks that's the most important? Alright, so we have 1. And his first his teacher. Alright, so his birthday, we have determined, is one of the most important things in Beethoven's life. Now, we're going to pick another one from this side. His first piano music being published, his first job, or moving to Vienna. Let's say, was moving to Vienna the most important? Raise your hands. No?
The what?
Was moving to Vienna the most important thing? One of the most important things? No?
Piano.
Was his first job the most important? His first piano music being published. Alright, everyone thinks that's... Alright. Alright, so that happened in... Oh dear. 1782. He became a published composer. Now, the next part of his life, when he moved to Vienna, that sort of began his career. That was the start of his musical fame, so to speak. And he started by learning from famous composers like Mozart and Haydn. And that was very important. It was very influential on his music because a lot of times when you're learning something, you tend to start off sounding like your teachers or doing something like your teachers. He was the same way. His musical style was very light and very happy, a lot like Mozart and Haydn. His first famous piano sonata was Pathetique in 1798, and his first symphony in 1800. The other famous sonata was the Moonlight Sonata, and that's very important for this. His biggest career event, so to speak, was when he performed in Vienna for the first time. That was big. Everyone absolutely loved him. They thought he was great. Mozart said, "Remember his name, because you will be hearing from him soon." Now, his biggest personal event happened in 1801, and he fell in love. Now, falling in love, that can do a lot of things to a person. He met a girl named Julie Guicciardi, and she was a noblewoman, and he was a commoner, so they couldn't get married. So instead, his famous Moonlight Sonata, he dedicated it to her. Now, we're going to do the same thing we did with the early period. Who thinks, what's more important? His famous piano sonatas and his first symphony being written? Or how he wrote his music? Which was more important? Let's go with who thinks the musical characteristics were more important? No? Alright, so we'll go with his famous piano music being more important. Now, from the other one, his first concert in Vienna or falling in love? Let's do his concert in Vienna. Do you think that influenced his music more? Who thinks falling in love influenced him more? Yeah. Okay. So falling in love. Alright. So this was a pretty, for the early period, I'm going to erase these. I'm putting them in the wrong sections. I apologize. So, music and falling in love, the most important parts of his early career movement. Now, the next part was his most famous, his biggest, where almost all of his famous pieces were written. They happened in what's called Beethoven's middle period. Now, this was also known as what's called the heroic period. And he wrote things like his Third Symphony, his Fifth Symphony. Can anyone hear about his Fifth Symphony?
What's it called? Wasn't it that dun, dun, dun.
Yep. Famous dun 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 dun.
Oh, I know that.
See? So, it's still famous even today. Another piece he wrote was for Elise, which means for Elise. This music, the piece Ode to Joy that you heard, sounded a lot like his stuff in the middle period. It was a lot of struggle, like you felt like if it was a storybook, like the hero was struggling and he was having a really tough time. He was going through a lot of problems. And then at the end, the hero would win. So, for Ode to Joy, that was the winning part of one of his symphonies. Now, his biggest career event had to do with the Third and Fifth Symphony. His Third Symphony was the biggest. It was the grandest. It was the most of any symphony anyone had ever seen. It was, people were just blown away. And his Fifth Symphony was considered the best of the era. So, like, if you could think of the most famous piece you've ever heard in your entire lifetime, the Fifth Symphony was Beethoven's. Now, biggest personal event. So a lot of famous things are happening in his career. His career is going well. But then he started going deaf. He had a lot of health problems in his life, but the biggest one that everyone knows is that he started going deaf in 1801. The other thing that happened was, surprise, he fell in love with again. And that was part of the reason he wrote For Elise. But no one is actually really sure who Elise was. So, what do we think is most important about his middle period? Was it his symphonies or the kind of music that he wrote? Raise your hand for the symphonies being written. Really? Okay. Alright, we'll go with that. Alright, so the kind of music. And for the second one, was it him becoming a master in his Third and Fifth Symphonies, or was it him going deaf? Raise your hand for him going deaf being the biggest thing. Pretty much a unanimous vote. Alright, so after the middle period and him becoming deaf, things went downhill for him, personally. He didn't really like going out. He was depressed because he was a musician that was going deaf, which is understandable. I'm a cellist, and I certainly wouldn't want to go deaf at all. So, his late period, he didn't write as much, but what he did write was amazing. So, this was his Ninth Symphony. This is where Ode to Joy was written. It was written in 1824, and people, they loved Beethoven, but they were confused. They weren't quite sure what to make of it, because a lot of people said that the beginning sounded like the orchestra was tuning. Like it was just a garbled mess, so they weren't quite sure what it was. And despite the fact that he's going through such a tough time, his music was big and grand and emotional. And you can sort of tell that. Now, his biggest career event over here had to do with his Ninth Symphony. Because like we said, Beethoven wasn't all that happy a guy. And so he sort of like kept to himself. He stayed home a lot. He didn't make a lot of public appearances. So he went to the premiere of his Ninth Symphony. He actually conducted. And by this time he was completely deaf. And the story goes that when he conducted and the symphony ended, he turned around, took a bow, but he couldn't hear anyone clapping. And he couldn't really hear the orchestra. So he actually started to cry on stage because he knew that he was completely deaf and he couldn't even hear his audience clap for him anymore. It was very depressing. And the biggest personal event, obviously, would be he died in 1827. And tens of thousands of people came out onto the streets for his funeral procession to get one last look at Beethoven as he made his way to his grave. So, what out of these two, writing his Ninth Symphony or the kind of music, how it sounded, what influenced his music more? What influenced his life more? Let's take a vote. His Ninth Symphony. Really? Wow. Okay. Alright, so the characteristics. And out of these two, his first public appearance or his death? What kind of mattered more? His death. Let's go death. Yeah, unanimous decision. All right, so his death in 1827. Now, when you go to the concert, what I want you to do is I want you to listen, because a lot of the pieces, all of the pieces they're going to play are Beethoven. But if you listen carefully and you think about all the things that happened in Beethoven's life, you can hear it in the music. It's like I said at the beginning, what happens in an artist or a composer or a musician's life influences a lot of what they do and how they do it. So, when you're listening to his music, think about that and try and think, do you think this was from his early period or middle period or late period? See if you can tell. Now, does anyone have any questions about Beethoven? Any other questions?
So, do you think at the game the stone is pretty big?
It's huge. There was another picture, and the girl she looked about my height, came up to that little harp, so you can tell it's pretty big. He was a big composer, he deserved a huge grave. Anyone else? No? Fantastic. Everyone have their... Okay.
What is that name behind the head?
The head, that was a cast. Okay. So we have a lot of people wondering that. Probably should have explained that. That was a face mask done. That was a cast of his face that was done before he died. So that is the actual face of Beethoven. It's kind of sad. It's understandable. He was allowed to be sad. Alright. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, it was lovely having you guys.